What would we do if someone asked us to say or do something that we knew was against God, that we knew would be a sin for us to do? What if there were consequences if we didn't do what that person said? What if it was even the government? What if it was a president or a king or someone in authority who was commanding and ordering us to say or do something that was not right in the eyes of God and threatened us with some kind of punishment, maybe even punishment of death? What would we do? What are we going to do in those kind of situations when and if those do arise? And it is not unlikely to happen, even in some parts of the world now, and who knows what the future brings. What about our faith? What about when our faith is tested? What about our courage? What about our confidence and hope in God? And thankfully, God has provided us for some examples in His Word, plenty of examples where there were men and women of great faith who courageously stood against the world, who would not relent in their faithfulness to God, who would never give in to the pressures of society. Unfortunately, we also have plenty of examples of men and women who did give up their faith or who did give in to the pressure, who did turn away from God. And so now today, it is left to us. What is our choice going to be? Whose example are we going to follow? Are we going to be faithful to God no matter what the consequences, no matter what the pressures of society may be around us, whether it's from family or friends or government? We've got to be true to God no matter what. In today's example that I want to look at, I want to put the spotlight on Daniel. In the book of Daniel, if you have your Bibles, I want to open with me in the Old Testament to the book of Daniel. We were actually there last time, and we looked at Daniel's three friends who were captured with him, who were in Babylon in captivity with him. We had looked at Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah there in Daniel chapter 3 last time. We saw their great example when King Nebuchadnezzar actually had ordered and commanded everyone to bow down to this golden image that he had made. And Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah would not do it. And they were willing to allow themselves to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And thankfully, God saved them from that, and all turned out well. Well, similarly, something would happen later, specifically with Daniel. In Daniel chapter 6 is where we're going to be today. Daniel chapter 6, beginning in verse 1, and at this time, the Persians were now in control. Daniel and his three friends there. Daniel chapter 6 really only talks about Daniel. Now the spotlight is on him. And so in Daniel chapter 6, in the first few verses, we find that King Darius had actually set Daniel as one of the governors over the territory, and was even, Daniel verse 3, it talks about how he distinguished himself above the other governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king, he was even thinking about setting Daniel up over all of the realm. But then we see that there were some who got jealous of Daniel. If you remember, if not, let's read beginning in verse 4. That the governors and the satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. So these guys are jealous. They want to find something against Daniel. They want to dig up some kind of dirt or something, in regards to the kingdom, and maybe Daniel has broken some laws, or maybe he has taken some bribes, or maybe he has done something they can use against him for the king to then punish him and, get rid of him. But one amazing thing about Daniel's example is when people went looking for dirt, they couldn't find any. Now, I'm sure that in Daniel's life, Daniel was not perfect, but he was a righteous man. And there was nothing they could find against him when it came to the law of the land that he was breaking or lying or cheating or anything like that. And so verse 5, they said, "We will not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So they know that what they can use against Daniel is to make him choose between the law of the land and the law of God, then they'll most likely have something to use against him. So they came to the king in verse 6, King Darius. They said to him, beginning of verse 7, all the governors of the kingdom and the administrators and satraps, the counselors, the advisors, we have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. So they come up with this plan and they, flatter the king. Obviously, Daniel's not a part of this. They say, King, we've got a great idea. For 30 days, let's make people pray to you or through you and you alone. You can't pray to any other god. You can't pray to nobody. It's got to be to great King Darius and to him alone. And they know that this is going to present a problem and a challenge for Daniel because of Daniel's faith, which is not idolatry. It is to the one true God, Jehovah, Yahweh. And so, and they come up with this plan that if anyone disobeys this law of the land, that they're going to be thrown into the den of lions. They're going to be executed by being eaten and torn up by lions. And what a horrible way to die. Much like the fiery furnace in chapter 3 was a horrible way to die. This would be a horrible way to die. So what's going to happen? What's Daniel going to do? Now Daniel is presented with this situation, this test, this choice he has to make between obeying men or obeying God. Well, we find in verse 10 that when Daniel knew that this writing was signed, that it was decreed, it was the law of the land, you had to pray to and through King Darius, and if you didn't, you were going to be punished, you were going to be executed. Daniel knew that, and he knew that it was signed. He knew that it can't be changed. You can't go back on it. So what's he going to do? Well, it says that he knew this, and he went home, and in his upper room, which are with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Wow. Daniel is facing death. And in human reasoning, Daniel could have said, well, I'll just kind of, play by the rules, of the land for 30 days. And then after 30 days, I'll get back to, doing my own thing. Or he could have made any excuse. I mean, we're talking death here. We're talking serious consequences. But Daniel didn't hesitate. Daniel didn't make excuses. Daniel didn't justify any ways or means of getting out of his relationship and commitment and faithfulness to God. He went home. He opened the window. He didn't hide it. He prayed several times to God, just as he always had, because of his faith and trust in God. And of course, verse 11, the men had assembled and they found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And so then they go before the king and they speak to him concerning the decree. Or they speak to the king and say, have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And the king says, well, yes, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, and it cannot change. So they answered and said before the king, well, that Daniel, verse 13, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, for you, or for the decree that you have signed, because he makes his petition 3 times a day, obviously to his own God. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, because, Daniel actually had good standing with the king, and the king didn't want to see someone like Daniel killed. And he labored all night to the going down of the sun to deliver Daniel, but he couldn't because of the law. So the men approached the king and said, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute with which the king establishes may be changed. And so the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings or the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. He could not be saved from it, or he could not be taken out by men. Now the king went to his palace, verse 18, and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of the lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And thankfully then the king heard what he wanted to hear, and really what all of us wanted to hear. And that is the voice of Daniel. Daniel said, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And then the king gave the command. They brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them and their children and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. God delivered Daniel from the mouth of the lions. But again, just like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah back in chapter 3, when they were willing to be thrown into the fiery furnace, to not disobey or sin against God. What if God didn't save Daniel? What if God allowed Daniel to be killed and eaten by those lions in the den? It wouldn't have changed this amazing example. Because there are plenty of other men and women throughout the Bible's history, of which Hebrews 11 talks about in the latter part, who did face death and suffering because of their faith, and they didn't quit. Even if Daniel would have died in that lion's den, we would still have an amazing example of a man who was faithful to God, even though it meant death. And we need to remember to be willing to do the same, no matter the consequences, no matter what people may think or say or do to us. We cannot let the society around us, we cannot let mankind, whether it be through laws, whether it be through government, whether it be through just pressures of society, whether it be family or friends or neighbors or whoever, we cannot let anyone cause us to sin against God. And when we find ourselves in positions like this and our faith is being tested and challenged, we need to stand like Daniel. And that no matter what is threatened around us, no matter what is said about us, we will not stop serving the Lord. No matter what. Because we know that whatever man may say or do to us, if we are faithful to God, then we will live eternally with God in heaven. And that is all that matters. Let's take encouragement and strength and boldness and conviction, commitment, determination, diligence from the example of Daniel and others like him, who showed great faith, unwavering faith in God. Let's grow in our faith and love and hope in God. God bless.